understand.
It's more of a memory, really. I was freed by the King Solomon, but he was taught by God to force my kind into obedience.
We are talking about the 2017 movie The Song of Solomon, or to give it its full title, American Guinea Pig, The Son of Solomon. And this one is directed by Stephen Biro and stars Jessica Cameron. Now, it is a possession movie, of which there are many, though this one does have a little bit of a unique feather to its cap. So let me give you the brief synopsis here. Ultimately, it follows Jessica Cameron's character Mary, who is a girl that is possessed by a demon, and we kind of see at the beginning of the movie the kind of the first signs of possession ultimately, and then we have some type of kind of archbishop type sending a couple of priests to do the exorcism, and they're giving them some sort of special equipment, and ultimately that kind of fails, and then it's a case of sending in subsequent kind of priests to try and obviously pick up where they could have left off, and ultimately, rid this kind of this girl of this kind of possession. Now there is a subplot here involving the true motives of the demon that kind of is possessing this girl, and also the church's motives as well. So let's discuss the Song of Solomon. So I'm not familiar with the Unearthed films or the American Guinea Pig series. This is the first one I've seen, and I feel this movie. Well, when I first heard about this film, I'd heard a lot of positive stuff. I watched a review on YouTube, the Horin TOG, I think it was, that did it, and I've seen a couple of things on social media really kind of praising it, saying, it's a super gory possession film, and that is its kind of little feather in the cap. Is that this is this is the goriest possession film I've ever seen, to be quite honest with you. I mean, it really is a splatter flick. I mean, it's just when we kind of get going, it doesn't stop. The gore here is pretty consistent, and there are some particularly kind of imaginative kills here. So if you are a gorehound, then you'll definitely want to check this one out. We'll come on again to the gore in a little bit, but yeah, there's all sorts of very kind of imaginative kills, all done through practical effects and kind of like prosthetics and kind of special makeup, etc. I actually quite like the makeup in regards to the kind of Jessica Cameron's character, her kind of contact, this kind of like goat-like eyes. I thought made for a particular disturbing kind of look in regards to this kind of like this demonic possession. Obviously, we've seen the kind of like the goat kind of like used as kind of a satanic symbol many times before, but just having these kind of like the simple thing of having these kind of goat contact lenses, I thought was really effective, and it kind of changes from shot to shot. Sometimes there's a good scene at the beginning where this doctor kind of keeps noticing this girl's eyes change. I thought was actually quite a good scene. And there's actually quite a fun priest who's kind of like a militant ex-military priest, who's kind of like the Terminator of the priest, and he was quite a kind of a fun character. So what doesn't work? Okay, so I was expecting quite a lot from this film, I would say, because I'd heard nothing but good stuff. I thought it was like a real kind of like horror fans, film ultimately made for horror fans, and I have to say I was disappointed with this one for a number of reasons. Most notably, there's virtually no story here. The actual film pretty much starts off with Jessica Cameron being possessed. We have no backstory about her character prior to that. There's no kind of idea about how she became possessed. She just is. All of the film is a series of priests being sent to this house, this one location, doing exorcisms, and then they kind of do the same thing. And I noticed with the we ultimately have 3 attempts. There's 3 kind of rounds of priests, if that makes sense, and each of them have kind of got a special background that's never really kind of explored. It's just kind of like a little bit of a kind of exposition at the beginning, saying, oh, this guy's got this, that, and the other kind of background. But ultimately, they all kind of like end up being the same. They all say just the Lord's Prayer a bunch of times, which I thought was a little basic for a kind of an exorcism film. They just tend to repeat the Lord's Prayer, and there doesn't seem to be much of it than that. You know, a couple of like shakes of holy water and things. But the actual exorcism ritual seems to me very basic compared to what we've seen in other kind of exorcism films. And the problem is that we don't have a protagonist in this film, because they kind of, there's a different priest every kind of like act of this movie ultimately. So we have no central protagonist, and none of these guys are kind of introduced before their actual kind of turn. And there's little to no backstory in them outside of a little bit of kind of exposition at the kind of the beginning when they're kind of first introduced, and then literally off they go into this house. And then kind of do the same kind of possession. So ultimately, the plot here is absolutely paper thin. And then what we do have is kind of just repeated. So it ultimately becomes a little boring. Even the gore scenes, I have to say, become a little bit tiring, because they just maybe go on a little bit too long. I mean, there's one scene where Mary basically throws up her sort of internal organs and then kind of eats them again, and that sounds like really gross and kind of like, you know, gory and stuff to kind of watch, but it just goes on for too long. And I think, okay, I get the idea, we can kind of, let's kind of like get the story kind of going a little bit. So the film is kind of boring. The effects I've mentioned, I mean, the effects are, there's lots of them, and then obviously it's all practical, lots of gooey effects. But they border on comical in regards to the way they look. I mean, these effects are not realistic. They kind of, I don't know. I mean, they're like fun horror effects, if that makes sense. It sounds like a weird thing to say, and I don't think it was meant to be like a comedy. But the gore effects just are so OTT, shall we say, that it kind of looks comical. The other thing I've got to talk about is the acting, and this is always difficult because I feel like I'm kind of like, you know, having a kind of a pop at the actors here, but the acting was some of the worst I've seen. Really bad acting. I mean, it is just hammy, and the dialogue that is obviously written for the actors is also terrible. Really, really bad. I mean, it's just awful acting from nearly all of the cast. I mean, some fare a little better. I quite like this kind of like the Terminator priest, I've forgotten the actor's name, and I guess Jessica Cameron does the best of what she's got, but even her, no one is a good actor in this film. The acting is all bad in varying degrees of. But yeah, it's really kind of distracting. And then there's some technical aspects here that I found quite irritating as well. There is, the decision has been made to let people overtalk. So you have one person's kind of saying something, and then someone else kind of saying something else. Like the possessed Mary will be saying something, and then one of the priests will be saying something on the top. And you just kind of lose what people were saying, so you can't really understand what's going on. There is a term for this, I've forgotten what it's called, but yeah, I mean, it's just bad filmmaking at the end of the day, because you are missing dialogue. Now, one aspect where I felt what this movie could have gone where it was, I mean, it had a little bit of this, but to me, this was the most interesting thing, was the subplot about the kind of both the churches and the kind of the demons' motives for doing what they're doing ultimately. And that to me was the most interesting aspect of the film in regards to plot. But it's really, I mean, this kind of gets like 3 minutes of screen time in total in the film. So it's really just a kind of a B plot. And I don't feel you can kind of have this kind of like couple of minutes of dialogue really, and a scene at the end which kind of gives you the motivations of what's going on. And even that's telegraphed way in the kind of like the beginning of the movie. So I've got to say, I mean, I was quite disappointed with this film. I actually thought this was. I mean, if you just want to watch some kind of fun gore effects, then you'll get a lot out of this. But for me, personally speaking, this was quite a bad film because there was no central protagonist. There was no character development. The story was weak. The effects, although plentiful, were I don't know, not particularly kind of well done in some circumstances. The acting was just awful. Yeah, so not impressed, I'm afraid. This is possibly one of the worst exorcism films, I would say. But I will say there are people. The other reviews I've seen of this have all been positive. So this is just my personal opinion on this one. I think people are getting caught up with the gore and kind of think, oh, it's loads of gore, it's loads of fun and all that. But to me, I don't know, I look a little deeper, to be honest with you, and for me, it just didn't work. But obviously, if you just kind of want to watch like loads of kind of like OTT gore and cheaper kind of like practical effects, but very imaginative and inventive, admittedly, then you may get something from it. But I kind of want a bit more story in a film, and at least a clear protagonist ultimately, or characterization. So no, this was for me a bit of a miss. So I want to give this one a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.